accommodate you as soon as we can. All right, counsel, anything else before we go to opening statement?
Not for the statement. No, thank you.
All right, Ms. Crawford, then whenever you are ready.
Children often suffer the consequences of the decisions of adults. And this case is no exception to that. This is Hannah Nicole Driver.
And Ms. Crawford, I'm gonna have, can you move the microphone that's on the lectern a little bit closer to you?
This one?
Yes, I think you can move it. Is it taped down? That'd be good. Thank you.
This is Hannah Nicole Driver. On December 8th of 2020, she was 13 months old. This is not the way that you will see her in this trial. Instead, you will see her the way that first responding officers saw her, the way that the EMTs saw her, the way that the ER doctors saw her, and eventually the way that the medical examiner saw her. You will see this 13-month-old beautiful baby girl who had been brutally murdered by her mother, stabbed repeatedly until every bit of life drained out of her, and she died. But I wanted to start with a picture of what Hannah Nicole Driver was like before that happened. You are going to hear that Chloe Driver was her mother, and Chloe Driver was involved in an alternative lifestyle. You're going to hear, as the week goes on, a lot of distracting evidence. You are going to hear a lot of messy evidence about this group, about their belief systems. You are going to hear a lot of things that take the focus off of Hannah Nicole Driver. And I wanted to start with this photo because what your role is in this case, and what your decision is in this case, is what happened to Hannah. And what the laws are governing the death of Hannah. And what your decision is with regard to the murder of Hannah. But you will be confronted this week with a lot of shiny objects, a lot of dramatic, crazy evidence about these people and their viewpoints and their belief systems and their practices. You're going to hear that Chloe Driver was one of 3 wives of a man named Brian Joyce. All of them had alternative religious names that they assigned to each other. Brian Joyce also went by the name Benjamin Ben Michael. Some people call him Z. Chloe Driver went by the name Kuwani. Hannah, the baby, they called Nimsi. The other 2 wives, Jessica and Sarah, they had other religious names as well. But the evidence will be that that group, that core group of 3 wives and the husband, Benjamin, that of the 3 wives in 2020, Chloe had been with Benjamin the longest. Of the 3 wives, she was the longest surviving wife of that group. And then after her came Jessica, who had been in the group for about 2 years. Chloe had been with him for about 3 years. And then Sarah came last. She had been with him for less than a year. But they all lived together as a family. Chloe had a baby, Hannah, with Benjamin. And so it was Benjamin, the 3 wives, and the baby. You'll also hear the evidence that there was another individual that spent a lot of time with them, traveled with them, participated in a lot of their same belief systems. His name's Jason Spillers. You'll see him in this case and hear evidence from him as well. So the belief system. What you will hear is that they had very sort of radical views. They were strict vegans. They only drank purified water. They did not believe in any type of drugs or alcohol, no modern medicine. Hannah never had a birth certificate or went to the doctor. You'll hear that they participated in alternative healing practices like drinking their own urine, sensory deprivation, meditation, that they did not believe in modern medicine. You will hear that they collectively as a group engaged in this sort of thought process that they had a higher consciousness than the rest of the world, that they were called upon to challenge the realities of sort of the traditional worldview. And that was something that they all leaned into and felt pride in. And it was collective as the group. They were all like-minded in that way. Now, you're also going to hear that they were pretty nomadic, that they didn't have strong roots anywhere, that they traveled around a lot, that they bounced from place to place, spent time in different locations. None of them were from Cherokee County. It was a sheer coincidence that this act happened in our jurisdiction, and I'll get into that. On December the 8th of 2020, they were traveling from North Carolina down to Florida. Benjamin, the husband, had previously lived in a residence at 215 Mountain Vista Boulevard in Canton, Georgia, with a man by the name of Gerald Ablin. Gerald Ablin still lived in that residence on December the 8th of 2020, and so in their travels, Benjamin, Jason Spillers, and 3 wives, Sarah, Jessica, Chloe, and the baby, Hannah, were all caravanning from North Carolina down to Florida in 4 different vehicles, a U-Haul and 3 cars, and they were planning to move down to Florida. And they stopped at Jerry Ablin's house in Canton, Georgia, 3 miles from this courthouse, because Benjamin had stuff in Jerry's basement. And so the plan was for Jason and Benjamin to load up the stuff that was in Jerry's basement into the U-Haul and to get back on the road and head to Florida. What happened was, when they got there, 2 of the wives, Sarah and Jessica, went to one of the upstairs bedrooms to take a nap. And Hannah and Chloe went to another upstairs bedroom to take a nap. Gerald Ablin, the homeowner, worked from home. He's a software engineer. So he was on a Zoom call working, and the women and the baby went to the room so they didn't disturb him. And Jason Spillers and Benjamin went to work moving the things out of the basement into the U-Haul. It was supposed to be a seemingly short stopover, and then they would all get back on the road. And when they were done, and it was time to leave, something happened. This is the residence. You'll hear that when Jason and Benjamin were distracted moving things out of the basement, Chloe Driver at some point went down to the kitchen, got a knife out of the knife block, returned to the room with Hannah, locked the door behind her, and repeatedly stabbed Hannah to death with this knife. She then took the knife and stabbed herself in the neck. This is where Hannah Driver bled to death. You will hear that Jason and Benjamin were out in the driveway. They were getting ready to go. Sarah and Jessica had come down. They were in the driveway getting ready to go. And Benjamin went upstairs to get Chloe and the baby. And the door was locked. And he heard noises. And he panicked. And he kicked the door down. And he found the scene of his 13-month-old daughter bleeding to death on the bed, and Chloe on the ground with a knife wound to her neck as well. You'll see evidence of him kicking in the door. And you'll hear the witnesses who said they heard the most blood-curdling scream from him. What did you do? What did you do? You will see the body cam footage of the first responders on the scene who rushed in to try to save the baby and Chloe Driver. And what you will see is Benjamin with his hands on Hannah's neck trying to keep her from bleeding to death, and Jason Spillers, the other man that's a part of this group, with his hands on Chloe's neck trying to save her life. You will see these men were in shock. They were desperately trying to help. And you will see the response of first responders, EMTs, and everybody who did everything they could for Hannah and Chloe. You will hear that Hannah died, that she had 4 stab wounds. One of them was a 1.5-inch deep stab wound to her back. The other wounds were 3 stab wounds to the neck, one of which was so deep that it went all the way through her tiny neck, transected her carotid artery, and hit her vertebrae. You are going to hear a lot of evidence about Benjamin, and I don't particularly expect you to like him. I expect you are going to hear that they're not from Cherokee County. But what I want you to remember in this trial is that their belief system and practices are not on trial. We only have jurisdiction over crimes that happened in Cherokee County. And what the evidence will be is that the only crime that happened in Cherokee County was a crime that was committed by Chloe Driver. The evidence will show that the only act committed by Benjamin in Cherokee County was the desperate act to save his baby daughter. And you will see it. Now, the state has the burden of proving that she murdered Hannah and that she intended Hannah's death. And that will be very, very clear from the evidence. The defense is raising the issue of insanity and going to ask you to find her not guilty by reason of insanity. And that is their burden to prove. There is a legal definition of what insanity is, and opening statements are not necessarily the appropriate time for us to get into what the law is and how you apply the law. That will be something that comes at the end of this trial. But what opening statements are for is to give you a roadmap, to help you focus on the important issues and to help you know what to look for when the evidence is coming before you. And so in that regard, the things that I can appropriately tell you is you're going to hear a lot of things in this case about throwing witnesses and evidence, throwing around terms like crazy, mentally ill, insane. And you, as human beings that know the English language, probably use all of those terms kind of interchangeably. But the truth is the law has definitions for things, and they are not the same. So what I would like for you to pay attention to in the presentation of evidence in this case is the evidence that she understood the wrongfulness of her actions, that she understood the difference between wrong and right. And there will be plenty of evidence presented to you that she did. One of those pieces of evidence is when she was sitting in the hospital bed, one of the first things that she wrote to law enforcement, because she could not speak because she had a trach, was, "How long will my prison sentence be for killing her?" This is the evidence that will come before you that demonstrates that she understood the wrongfulness of her actions. Pay attention. She locked the door. She waited until she was isolated. Those are pieces of evidence that will come before you that are important. The next thing I would like you to pay attention to in the presentation of evidence is why she killed Hannah. There will be evidence about why she killed Hannah. Pay very, very close attention to what motivated her actions. He didn't do it, I did it. I was going insane and no longer wanted to be with his friends, but kept coming back for him. I only wanted my baby and husband, but he refused. The evidence will be she wanted him. She wanted to be with him. She was the first of this group of 3 wives, and the 2 others came after her. The evidence will be clear that she wanted to be with him, and he was never going to give up this polygamous cult lifestyle that they had adopted. This was one of the first writings that she made about why she killed Hannah. Pay attention to the why. Her cell phone was searched, and you'll see evidence of that. She searched killing somebody to save them. Also, a couple of weeks before she killed Hannah, she searched how to snap a neck. The evidence is going to be she was evaluated in the hospital by a psychiatrist shortly after she killed Hannah, and he indicated patient felt the only way out was to kill her daughter and herself. I couldn't handle being with the group anymore, and you left no alternative with certain threats. This was her note that she wrote to Benjamin. She wanted him and the baby, and she wanted everybody else to go. And that wasn't an option, so she picked a different one. There is going to be evidence in this case that she believed some things that were pretty crazy. And there's that word again, crazy. And it doesn't have a legal definition. You're going to be focused more on mental illness and insanity and making your determination. But just in the English language context, there's going to be evidence that comes before you that sounds insane. There is going to be evidence that she believed things that the rest of the group believed too. That the world is fake, that we're living in hell, that they have the ability to, with their minds, control the actions of other people around them. These things were not unique to Chloe Driver. The entire group believed that this higher level of consciousness was something that they were called upon to do, to serve the world. And so what I ask you to do when you are assessing these things is, there may be a question about whether these are delusions or whether these are just genuinely held religious views that maybe are untraditional that the rest of the world doesn't agree with. And that's something that you're going to have to parse out. But here's the thing that is very, very clear and will be very important to your determination in this case. None of these bizarre views had anything to do with Hannah. That is of critical importance. I started with a picture of Hannah, and I'm going back to it, because when we talk about the issue of insanity that will be raised in this case, you have to focus on how her belief system, her mind, her thoughts, how those things related to Hannah, her feelings about Hannah, the reason she committed the act against Hannah. You cannot just say she has crazy beliefs without considering Hannah. So in this case, what you will hear and what the evidence will show is not a single witness, not a single doctor that evaluated her, not a single statement Chloe Driver has ever made was that she believed Hannah was any kind of a threat to her. There will be no evidence of that. You will not hear that she was ever afraid of Hannah. You will not hear that she ever felt like she needed to defend herself against Hannah. And how she felt about Hannah in her mind and in her actions and informing her intent is something that you need to pay attention to in this case. It will help you solve the legal equation. Whether she had delusions or not is a teeny tiny part of the legal equation you will solve. The evidence that will come before you is none of that stuff related to the reasons why she committed this act against Hannah or her beliefs about Hannah, the baby, the victim in this case. You are going to have to evaluate the evidence that comes before you about whether any of her belief systems were manifestations of mental illness and how that related to the act that she committed. And what the evidence is going to be is that any manifestations of mental illness were completely separate from the motivations for why she killed Hannah. The evidence is going to be that her motivation for why she killed Hannah wasn't her delusions, it was her reality. The evidence is going to be that she couldn't decide if she wanted to stay or go, so she picked a third option. And the evidence is going to show that that wasn't delusional at all. That was very reasonable thinking based upon the situation she willfully put herself in. I suspect in this case there is going to be a lot of effort to paint Chloe Driver as the victim instead of this baby girl. You are going to hear that she was held against her will, she didn't feel like she was free to leave, but the evidence is going to demonstrate that that is not true. The evidence is going to demonstrate that as she sat there and stabbed Hannah to death, she had a diaper bag with her personal effects in it, and inside that diaper bag was a cell phone, $1,000 cash, blank checks in the name of Chloe Alexis Driver that connected to a bank account in the name of Chloe Alexis Driver that had $65,000 in it. She had the means to leave.
The evidence is going to be she didn't want to. She wanted him. She had supportive parents who she had seen the day before she murdered Hannah. And instead, she chose to go with the group. That is what the evidence is going to be. The evidence will not be that she was held against her will. The evidence will be that she exercised her free will in wanting to be with Benjamin. The evidence will be that at every opportunity, she took the opportunity to maintain her relationship with him, even after she murdered Hannah. The evidence will be that she wanted to have her cake and eat it too. Even after she was arrested and charged with murder, the evidence that will come before you is that she was simultaneously talking to doctors, speaking to lawyers, evaluating her options for a defense in this case, telling them that she was an oppressed victim of this religious cult to shirk responsibility for her criminal actions and placing the blame on Benjamin, saying all those things to the doctors and professionals that were evaluating her, while simultaneously continuing to maintain conversations with him, continuing to maintain a relationship with him, making hundreds of phone calls to him and telling him how much she loved him. Phone calls that she placed out. He could not call her. The evidence will not be that she could not exercise free will. The evidence will be that she wanted to be with him. What you are going to hear is probably that this cult lifestyle wasn't great for her mental health. But that is not the issue before you in this case. The evidence is going to be that Chloe Driver was swimming in the pond she jumped in. And she did it willfully. It was the air that she breathed. And she chose that even after she took the life of Hannah Nicole Driver. You will not hear that she was deprived of free will. You will see that she exercised her free will. And the person that suffered the consequences of her choices was Hannah, not Chloe. The evidence will be clear that Chloe murdered Hannah. She did it willfully, she did it intentionally, and she wanted her to die. The evidence will also demonstrate, maybe, that Chloe was a weak-minded person who was particularly susceptible to the cult lifestyle. But that is not the issue before you. The evidence will not demonstrate that she meets the definition of criminal insanity to the extent that she cannot be held responsible for her actions. And once all of the evidence has come before you, and all of the witnesses have been questioned, I'm going to ask you to hold her responsible for the consequences that this child suffered from her choices and her decisions. And I'm going to ask you to find her guilty.
All right, Ms. Trethewey.